We're going to be taking a look at the book of Hosea tonight, and we have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right in pretty quickly here. We're going to try and get an understanding of the entire book's message. Okay, it's 14 chapters long, so obviously we won't be reading like every single verse. I looked it up to see if that was an option, but it's like 36 minutes, so I figured we probably shouldn't do that. But if you want to turn to Hosea, we'll be reading quite a few sections throughout the book. I do want to give you a real quick kind of preface to tonight, because in case you only happen to be paying attention for the first like 90 minutes, you're going to miss what's most important. Okay? And I say that because despite first appearances and first 90% appearances, tonight is actually a message of great hope. This is really a fitting study in light of what we heard from Pastor Justin on Sunday, where we saw a picture of really the wrath of God, because we're going to see more of that tonight. We're going to see how really sinful the nation of Israel was at the time of the book of Hosea, and how sinful we are. We'll see that God takes that serious. We'll see that we are prone to wander, prone to seek fulfillment from just about anything, just about anyone, just about any place, except for the one who offers true fulfillment. So that's going to be a big chunk. But then, at the end, we'll see that despite all of that, God remains ready, willing, and eager for us to turn back to him. No matter how bad it seems to get, and it's going to get bad as we look at this book, God's remaining ready, willing, and eager for us to turn back to him. I didn't want you to like fall asleep for the last 10 minutes and just think this was really depressing. So, any of you read the last couple pages of a book first? Just one of you does that, I guess. So that's what this is, I guess. But despite what we're going to see is just a terrible, sinful situation, the book is actually laced with a surprising amount of words of grace, even in the midst of great accusation. There's mercy kind of bursting at the seams throughout all of it. We'll see it in, I got a list of like 30 verses. That in the rubble of Israel's wickedness, in the aftermath of all their apostasy, all of their sin, all of really the ridiculous things that they did, the plea still goes forth for them to turn back to God, to know him, press on towards him. We truly are fools prone to wander. We would have sang that song today, except we did it on Sunday, so I figured we couldn't. We trust in ourselves, we trust in all kinds of false gods, and yet God says, I'll still have you. Yet God says, I'll take you back. So we'll just jump right in. We are going to start right in chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So this verse kind of sets the stage. It tells you what's happening. It tells you when it was written, who it was written by. We're not going to get into it too much, but from here you can see that the word of the Lord came to Hosea at a time where really the nation of Israel they were doing well. It was a time of prosperity. Jeroboam had extended Israel's borders. The nation was growing. They were relatively successful. They'd had several successful military operations. And even in the south, King Uzziah had defeated several enemies. Judah's armed forces were strong, they were doing well. But despite all the outward success, despite everything looking that it was okay, we're going to read that what God's estimation was anything but. God saw that there was great idolatry, great sins, great signs of trouble on the horizon. Verse 2, when the Lord began to speak to Hosea, the Lord said to him, so this is what God says to him. The Lord said to him, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry. by departing from the Lord. So he went and he took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So the message of God comes to Hosea, comes to God's prophet, and he says, go and marry a prostitute. Go and marry a prostitute. And then have kids with her. Go and marry a prostitute, have kids with her, have children of harlotry. Now, when you look at the Old Testament, you don't really see any of the prophets that got off easy. It was like, oh, God just gave them a really comfortable, really nice thing that they would desire to do. But one pastor said this about Hosea's commission, really. His job seemed more like a sick joke than a divine commission. Looking at what God told him to do, it looks like more of a sick joke than divine commission. Go marry a prostitute. And God says that by doing so, you'll know how I feel. Go marry a prostitute, because then you're going to know how I feel. Now, who's God's bride? Who's God's people? The nation of Israel. He says that is what the nation of Israel is like. They're like a prostitute. There's a lot of people that are unwilling to accept that God would actually ask this of him. So when they read this, they try and explain it away. They say, oh, this is just allegorical. This is just kind of a picture. God didn't actually ever tell one of his prophets to do this. I don't know that I believe that, because there's too much specific detail. It says he married Gomer. We know what her name is. We know what her mother's name is. And then there's other people who say, oh, this wasn't talking about a physical prostitute. It's just talking about, spiritually speaking, a spiritual harlot. Because that's a lot better, right? Because when you read the Bible, you get the impression that God's totally fine with spiritual harlotry, with hearts being all wrong, with seeking other gods, not being faithful in the spiritual realm, but not in the physical. No. So that's not any better. And then some people will go even further and they say, oh, God just in his wisdom, in his all-knowing, he knew what Gomer, the wife, was going to become. So she wasn't a prostitute when they got married, but God knew that she was sinful, that she was unfaithful, and that this would happen. I don't know. That's not what it says. It says God told them to go marry a prostitute. So I guess I'm going to assume that that's what God meant. I think that's kind of the safest thing when you come to the Bible. Assume that it means what it says it. One pastor said this, and I totally agree. If Hosea's story cannot be real because God could never ask a man to marry an unfaithful woman, so if this story cannot be real because God could never ask a man to marry an unfaithful woman, then neither is the story of salvation, because that's precisely what Christ has done for us. So this isn't the first time in the Old Testament, nor is it the last time where God's people are going to be compared to a harlot. In order to understand sin, in order to understand our relationship with God better, we need to understand that we're not merely peasants, subjects that are rebelling against a king. We're not just sheep straying from a shepherd. We're not just children that disobey their father, but we are like an unfaithful spouse committing adultery and breaking the heart of a God who has entered into a marriage covenant with us. In this book, we see kind of the clearest biblical picture of God as a wronged lover who sacrifices everything in order to save, to redeem his wayward bride. So we're going to take a look at how this marriage goes from, when you hear how it starts, it's hard to imagine it's going to go too well, and that's a safe assumption. And that's in chapters 1 through 3. 1 through 3 is kind of a picture of God's relationship with his people through this representation of Hosea married to this wife named Gomer. And then chapters 4 to 14 deal directly with Hosea's message to the nation of Israel. We'll jump to verse 6. And she conceived again, second child now, and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Jump to verse 9. Then God said, call his name, third child, Lo Ami, for you're not my people, and I won't be your God. Okay, not going too well, right? Second child, name it Lo Ruhamah, and that means literally not loved. Name your child not loved. Then Lo Ami, meaning not my people. So these are not loved and not God's people. That's what he says to name them. So it doesn't start out well. And we're going to see that it isn't as though Hosea found this fallen, unrighteous woman and then through love and kindness kind of wooed her, restored her to virtue. That's not how it starts. He marries a prostitute, probably hoping that she would give up that life, I would imagine, and be devoted to him. But no, she stayed a prostitute. Jump to chapter 2. Verse 2, bring charges against your mother. Bring charges, for she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. Let her put away her harlotries from her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and I expose her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and set her like a dry land, and slay her with thirst. I will not have mercy on her children, for they are the children of harlotry. For their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has behaved shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. So God paints the picture, remember, of Israel as an adulterous wife, but he says that she's no longer worthy to be compared to a wife. This shows that the relationship is broken. So they're still in covenant. There's still covenant between them, but the quality of that relationship is such that you can't possibly look at it. No one could look at that marriage and say, yep, this is a healthy marriage. This is what it's supposed to look like. No one would see it and see it as loving spouses. Chapter 2, verse 2, she's not my wife, I'm not her husband. Then in verse 5, you see that Israel kind of justifies her harlotry. She tries to make it seem okay because of the things that she received from her lovers. She says, well, they give me bread and they give me water. They give me my wool and my linen and my oil and my drink. Well, they take care of me. This is what I need. I hope that we can see ourselves as we're taking a look at this. I think it would do very, very little good for us to be like, oh yeah, Israel was pretty sinful, and that Gomer lady, she was quite the mess. No, we need to see our own sin in this. How often is it where we turn to idols and we think, yeah, but I get this pleasure from them. Yeah, they offer me this. I get my bread, I get my wine. She tries to excuse it, and we try and do the same. Just because sin makes you happy, just because sin offers some kind of satisfaction for a short period of time doesn't make it right. Just because you find some level of comfort and pleasure in the season of sweetness that sin provides doesn't mean it's something to be pursued. And how many of us stay in our sin, stay seeking our idols because of what we can get from them? Verse 6. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up your way with thorns and wall her in, so that she cannot find her paths. She will chase her lovers, but not overtake them. Yes, she will seek them, but not find them. Then she'll say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then it was better for me than now. For she did not know that I gave her grain and new wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. So it says that God is going to put thorns around the path. So most likely, if you're very intelligent anyways, when there's thorns on the path, when you're walking along and the edges are totally covered in bushes, brambles, that kind of keeps you on the path, right? It's not like, oh, I'm gonna go after there. And that's what God says he's gonna do, to keep her on the path. When God hedges our way with thorns, we don't like it. When God prevents us from wandering astray, we don't like it. I don't like it. I'm assuming you don't either. But that's one of the most loving things that he can do for us, that he can guard us against seeking what's not good for us. Really, we should rejoice when God would do that. We should rejoice that he would love us enough to keep us from running to the arms of some supposed lover who's going to offer no real love. He says, I'm going to keep you from them. I'll show you the emptiness, the hollowness of their promises, right? You're going to chase them. You're not going to catch them. And then you'll return to me. Verse 8 says, even when Israel went after other gods, the Lord still provided for her. Right? For she did not know that I gave her grain and new wine and oil and multiplied her silver and gold. So it wasn't these idols. It wasn't these false lovers. No, it was God that was providing. One author writes this: when Hosea provided for Gomer, she spent it on her adulterous lovers. It's as if Hosea went to the house of Gomer's lover where she lived, apart from her husband. He knew that this scoundrel of a man couldn't provide for Gomer, and that she lived in poverty and rags. Hosea knocked at the door. He spoke to the man who answered, are you the man living with Gomer? The man wondered what business it was of Hosea's. Then he revealed, I'm Hosea, her husband. I've brought these groceries and money so she can be provided for. When Hosea left, Gomer and her lover must have thought he was a fool. What a great dinner they had together with the food that Hosea brought. But this is how the Lord loves us, lavishing blessing on us, even when we are worshiping idols, providing us with blessings that we waste on other gods. Okay? I think that's an interesting picture of what this verse says. Gomer's there with her other lovers. She's there away from her husband, and yet Hosea provides. That's the picture that's being shown. Jump to verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, will bring her into the wilderness and speak comfort to her. I will give her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. She shall sing there, as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. And it shall be in that day, says the Lord, that you will call me my husband, and no longer call me my master. For I will take from her mouth the names of the Baals, and they shall be remembered by their names no more. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, with the birds of the air, and with the creeping things of the ground. Bow and sword of battle I will shatter from the earth to make them lie down safely. I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. One pastor says that this is one of the most beautiful love songs in all of the Bible. It's sung by a husband to his unfaithful wife. Sung by a husband to his unfaithful wife. This is a picture of the Lord saying, I won't forget you. So we know that God hates sin fiercely, angrily, and yet he's passionately committed with a merciful, steadfast, inexhaustible, never giving up love. Charles Spurgeon said this on the idea of, I think, verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. He says, this is a singular kind of power. I will allure her, not I will drive her, not even I will draw her, I will drag her, I will force her. No, I will allure her. It is a very remarkable word, and it teaches us that the allurement of love surpasses in power all other forces. This is how the devil ruins us. He tempts us with honeyed words, sweet utterances, with the baits of pleasure and the like. And the Lord in mercy determines that in all truthfulness, he will outbid the devil, and he will win us to himself by fascinations, enticements, and allurements which shall be stronger than any force of resistance we may offer. This is a wonderfully precious word. I will allure her. So God doesn't force us back to him. He doesn't drag us back to him. No, allures, which is different than lure. Lure has this kind of like creepy, like you hide the snacks, you hide behind the tree and you put something out there, and no, allure. It says, you will call me my husband. So with great anticipation, God looks forward to the day when the relationship is genuinely restored with his people, when they no longer just call him master, but they call him my husband. So God wasn't satisfied with some kind of fear-based obedience. He didn't want to primarily be known as their master. He wanted this loving relationship. Verses 19 and 20, 3 times it says, I will betroth you, I'll betroth you, I'll betroth you, I'll betroth you. It says righteousness, justice, steadfast love, mercy, faithfulness. So the message is clear. You played the harlot. You found comfort in all the wrong places. You sought other lovers. And the idea is that you'd have every reason in the world to give up. I'd have every reason in the world to give up on you, but I don't. I'm here. You just need to turn from your empty lovers, your worthless idols, and come back to me. Now we're going to skip chapter 3. We're going to come back. That'll be our grand conclusion. And kind of leave Hosea and his wife Gomer. When you hear the name Gomer, it doesn't make you think of this like really beautiful, great bride. I don't know, maybe back then it did. People laugh, so I assume you agree with me. Like Gomer just doesn't have the beautiful idea of a bride. I mentioned that to Matt earlier, and he said that when he was growing up, they had a garbage pile that they actually called Gomer. I don't know if it had anything to do, and he doesn't either, with this passage, but it's kind of fitting. I mean, when you read what she's like, what she did, and as we see the nation of Israel that she's representing, how they are, garbage pile is pretty fitting. That's why I say maybe your parents did it because of Hosea. You should ask. But we're going to leave them. We'll get back to them. But we're going to start in verse 4, where really the message turns directly from God dealing with the nation of Israel. We're going to go faster now because we'd never finish 14 chapters otherwise. So, chapter 4, verse 1, hear the word of the Lord, you children of Israel, for the Lord brings a charge against the inhabitants of the land. So here's the charge that God has against Israel. And again, it's important that we see ourselves here. In the book of Hosea, we don't get to play the role of Hosea. That's for Christ to do. So if we don't get to be Hosea, that means we get to be Gomer. We get to be the garbage pile. Okay? We're a bunch of Gomers. So we need to see ourselves in here. The fact is we are sinful, rebellious. We get to be the sinful, rebellious prostitute. That's who we are. If you don't see yourself in here, if you don't see yourself in the sin of the nation of Israel, I would say that we're deceiving ourselves. I mean, 1 John 1:8 says that if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. So if we try and pretend that this isn't us, that we don't fall into this, that we don't seek our own idols, we're liars. But anyways, here's the charge that God has against them. He says there's no truth or mercy or knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying, killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break all restraint with bloodshed upon bloodshed. So he says there's no truth, there's no mercy, there's no knowledge of God. No truth, no mercy, no knowledge of God. These are all interconnected. When people forsake the knowledge of God, when they don't know God, truth is going to degrade. There's no truth apart from knowledge of God. And then mercy goes. Because truth needs to be rooted in something more than personal opinion. It needs to be rooted in knowledge of God. And apart from God, there's no mercy. So again, if we're trying to see ourselves in here, is your life one marked of truth? Do you stand for truth no matter the consequences? Do you have a knowledge of God? Do you know him? Are you merciful? If you're a Christian, you've been given great mercy. Like, it has to start that way. If you're a Christian, you've been given great mercy. What has that done to you in return? Do you have mercy on others? Do you have mercy on others? Or do you always seek vengeance? Do you seek to be justified? Our modern age is completely against the idea of restraint there. At the end of that, it says they break all restraint. These are actual advertising slogans. To know no boundaries, no rules, just right, just do it, break all the rules, peel off all inhibitions, find your own road, live without boundaries. Okay, those are advertising slogans right now. I don't know about right now. Some of those might be outdated. I don't know that I've seen a Nike commercial that says just do it in a long time, but they're relatively recent. So our culture doesn't really accept this whole idea of restraint. They break all restraint. They don't like that. They never tell themselves no. Do you ever tell yourself no? Do you restrain yourself? Do you allow yourself to be restrained? Or instead, do you just go headlong into whatever it is that you desire? One of God's charges, they never restrain themselves. They just do whatever they want. Our culture says you make your own rules, you answer to no one, you're the one that matters. The universe revolves around you. You should only restrain yourself if you want to. I don't know if that really counts as restraint, but that isn't the way for the Christian. Okay, so we're seeing the sins. Some of these we're going to go by quickly. Chapter 4, verse 9, when you look into it, you can see that the priests are corrupt. That's one of the sins of the nation of Israel. Chapter 4, verse 10, we see that they disobey God, that they commit spiritual harlotry. They turn from God to other idols. They sacrifice to their idols. And it says they get counsel from their idols. They get direction from their wooden idols. That's how they made their decisions. They got their counsel from their wooden idols. Now, it's likely that you don't have little wooden idols. It might be that you have a large wooden idol, and instead of a statue, it's probably a house. The idols that we have today might be our homes, our jobs, our families, relationships, you name it. Is that what you get your counsel from? Is that how you make your decisions? Well, this is what my job says. This is what my family wants. This is what I got to do in order to get the house I've always wanted. They got their counsel from their idols. We do it too. God sees that. He sees that act of getting our counsel from our idols as spiritual prostitution. To receive what we should be getting from him and him alone, from anywhere else, God sees as spiritual harlotry. Jump to verse 14. I will not punish your daughters when they commit harlotry. That sounds good if you stop there. It's like, oh, here's a good verse. But no, it says, nor your brides when they commit adultery. For the men themselves go apart with harlots, and they offer sacrifices with a ritual harlot. Therefore, people who do not understand will be trampled. So he's saying, well, I'm not going to get after the women too much here right now, because the guys are doing it too. You know, the not going to punish the daughters when they commit harlotry. So the brides are committing adultery. The men likewise are going to prostitutes, and not just prostitutes. I don't know if it can get worse than going to a prostitute, but they're going to pagan ritual temple prostitutes. Okay, so here the sin that the nation of Israel was being charged with is sexual. And when that comes into our lives, that includes all kinds. Lust, fornication, adultery, you name it. It's sin that God despises. Verse 16 says that Israel's stubborn. One of the sins that they're charged with is that they're stubborn. I don't know if we see stubbornness as a sin all the time, but stubbornness can be a sin. It says that they're stubborn. Later it's going to call them a stubborn donkey. Verse 5:5, like I said, we're going faster now. It says they're proud. verse 5:5, they're charged with being proud. Over and over in Hosea, we see that the nation of Israel is a proud nation. They think they have the answers. They don't think they need God. Their pride gets the best of them. 5:11 says that they willingly walked by human precept. Let's read chapter 5, verse 11. Ephraim is oppressed and broken in judgment because he willingly walked by human precept. Therefore, I will be to Ephraim like a moth. Now, when you hear that someone's going to be like a moth to you, that doesn't, I don't know that carries that much weight. Like moths are mildly annoying, maybe if they fly around your head. But when you see moths in the Bible, they're a picture of destruction. They're a picture of destruction. That's why in the New Testament it says, don't store up treasure where moths can destroy, because moths are destructive. But here we see that they willingly walked by human precept. So they weren't living under the guidance, they weren't living underneath the authority of God's precept, they were just going after human ideas. Again, if you don't see yourself in there, you're a liar. Do we live after God's precepts or our own? Chapter 6, verse 4. O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, and like the early dew, it goes away. So their faithfulness is like a cloud. That's not a good thing. Clouds aren't very substantial. They kind of go away. Like you see a cloud and you don't know if it's going to be there later. A morning cloud, we're talking mist, right? You look outside, there's some mist, looks like a cloud, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, it's gone. We live in Duluth, so sometimes it lasts, till 8 o'clock at night. But overall, the morning cloud is a picture of something that isn't going to last, that has no substance to it. Something that's there 1 minute, gone another. He says, that's your faithfulness. You act like you have faith in me sometimes. There's a little passion, there's a little zeal once in a while. And then the sun comes out, the heat comes out, and it's gone. Things get hard and it's gone. Guys, that's not real faith. They're charged with not having real faith. Chapter 6, verse 7 says that they transgressed the covenant and dealt treacherously with the Lord. What that means exactly, to deal treacherously with the Lord, I don't know. But it doesn't sound good. I don't want to be accused of it. Actually, in chapter 6, we see that the nation of Israel, the people there, they're called murderers, they're called drunkards, they're called liars and evildoers. Okay? Chapter after chapter, verse after verse, we see their sin. Chapter 7, verse 2, it says that there's no consideration of God. No consideration of God. It says they don't consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own deeds have surrounded them. They are before my face. So they don't consider God. They don't realize that God's watching, that God knows what's happening. Chapter 7, verse 5, it says even that the kings and princes are corrupt. So it's the followers, it's the leaders, everyone's corrupt. Sin abounds. Chapter 7, verse 9. It says, aliens have devoured his strength. Okay, aliens have devoured his strength, but he doesn't know it. So he doesn't even realize that his strength is gone. Yes, gray hairs are here, and they're on him, yet he does not know it. So the idea with this, that gray hairs are there and he doesn't know it, that his strength has been devoured and he doesn't know it, is that there's been this slow slipping into sin where they don't even realize it. Okay, maybe none of you have gray hairs yet, but you usually don't notice the first one or the second one. But then one time you look in the mirror and you realize you're going gray. It's like, I didn't even realize that had happened. And that's the idea here. They don't even realize what's going on. They're slipping into sin unaware. I think Christians can get that way. They let sin get the best of them little by little. They don't realize the damage it's doing. They don't realize how bad it's really gotten. They might realize there's sin, but they don't think it's that bad. Not realizing that their whole head has turned gray. Chapter 7, moving on to verse 11, says, Ephraim, who is like a silly dove. We'll talk about that more later, without sense. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. So they seek answers anywhere but God. They have a God who wants to provide, they have a God who's there for them, and instead they call out to Egypt and Assyria. You know, the ones who had enslaved and killed them. So they have a God that's only ever proved himself faithful, loving to them, and instead they yell to Egypt and Assyria. They call out even to their enemies. They called out to their enemies. They called out to the things that used to enslave them, thinking that they were going to provide answers. We do that too. We finally escape from something. We finally get away from the bondage of some sin. And then we slowly go back to it, thinking that, this time around it's going to be okay. This time it's going to have the answers I need. This time it'll provide for me. No. You call out to them like a silly dove without sense. Jump to chapter 9. Moving quick now. Chapter 9, verse 7. It says, the days of punishment have come, the days of recompense have come. Israel knows the prophet is a fool. The spiritual man is insane because of the greatness of your iniquity and your great enmity. It says, Israel knows that the prophet is a fool and that the spiritual man is insane because of their iniquity. So they're so sinful that they come to the point where the men of God, those who are still representing God, the prophets, the spiritual men, are regarded as insane, are regarded as fools. Okay, when sin does that to you, your sin will do that to you, where the spiritual people around you, those you used to trust, the mature Christians around you, the prophets, you'll regard them as fools. You'll think they're insane. Your sin will do that. Chapter 10, verse 2, their heart is divided. It says their heart is divided. Now they're held guilty. He'll break down their altars. He will ruin their sacred pillars. So their hearts are divided. Other translations use the word false. They have divided hearts. So yeah, they might have a little bit of attention, a little bit of devotion, a little bit of worship, of following the Lord, but their heart's divided. Their heart's divided. The Bible doesn't really ever speak well of a divided heart, right? The Bible says to seek God with all of your heart and then you're going to find him, not, oh, you can have a divided heart and still find me. No, their hearts were divided. They weren't seeking God wholeheartedly. Okay, so the whole book is filled with their sins. Whole book is filled with their sins. We could go on and on, but that's a just overview. Sin abounds here. You read Hosea, sin abounds. We look at our life, sin abounds. If we're honest, we're more sinful than we might like to admit. But despite all of the sin, despite all the problems, chapter 7, verse 7 says, none of them cry out to God. Chapter 7, verse 14 repeats that idea. Despite all the sin, none of them cry out to God. So there's all this sin all around. There's only one way to deal with the sin, and that's to cry out and turn to God. And that's the one thing that they won't do. But here's the thing. In chapter 5, verse 2, God says, though I rebuke them all, okay? God's rebuking them all for their sin. They just keep on doing it. They just keep on doing it. But they're not getting away with it. Chapter 5, verse 3 says, I know Ephraim, and Israel isn't hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you commit harlotry. Israel is defiled. He's saying, I know what's going on. Israel isn't hidden from me. You commit harlotry and you're defiled. God says, I know what's happening. Chapter 6, verse 10, I have seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. So God sees Israel. It's not as if God closed his eyes, didn't know what was going on, unaware of the sin. He knows it. Don't hide your sin from God. Seems obvious. We shouldn't hide our sin from God. He knows what's happening. It'd be like going to the doctor. You have this huge gash on your arm, right? It's Maybe it's hanging there, your arm, can't move it anymore, blood dripping, and you're just kind of standing there like, no, I'm okay. You can't see that there's anything wrong with me. You try and cover it up. Go ahead and do it, but then the doctor's not going to see it. He's not going to treat it, and you'll be left on your own. You'll be left on your own. You want to pretend it's not there. You want to act as if you have no sin in your life. Fine, but then you'll be left to deal with it on your own. God sees Israel's sin. He knows it's happening. So now let's look at some of the language that God uses to describe this nation in light of their sins. We're seeing the plight of their sin. We saw that it's there, and here's what God thinks of it and what he's going to do. Chapter 4, verse 10 says they're going to eat, but they're never going to have enough. So they're sinful. God's not okay with it. Because of that, they're going to eat, and they're never going to have enough. Chapter 5, verse 7, God calls them alien children. Okay? He doesn't even really call them his children anymore. They're from a different place. They're alien children. Chapter 7, verse 4 says, they are all adulterers like an oven heated by a baker. He ceases stirring the fire after kneading the dough until it's leavened. You probably hear that and you lose a little bit what's being said. But if you warm up an oven, especially back then, you get the fire going, and then you leave and you mix up your dough, and then you let it rise and you don't ever stir your fire, don't add more wood, I imagine it's cooled off by now. It's useless. The idea is it's useless. Continuing with that idea, if you go to chapter 7, verse 7, it says they're all hot like an oven and have devoured their judges. All their kings have fallen. None among them calls upon me. Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples. He's a cake unturned. Aliens have devoured his strength, but he doesn't know it. He's a cake unturned. We don't have to turn cakes. At least I don't know. I don't make a lot of cakes. But the idea here is clear. It's not a good thing. I guess if a cake went unturned, it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't edible. A cake that you can't eat is of no use. An oven that isn't hot is of no use. Chapter 7, verse 11, this is the verse I said we'd be back to. God says that they're a silly dove without sense. This is his estimation of them and their sin. You're like a stupid bird. You don't make any sense. Chapter 7, verse 16 says they're like a treacherous bow. So here's another image. This book's heavy on the imagery. A treacherous bow, a faulty bow that won't shoot straight, that is of no good, that's dangerous. Jump to chapter 8, verses 7, 8, 9. We see that they're like a useless vine, an empty vessel, and a wild donkey. Useless vine, empty vessel, wild donkey. So words used are like an alien children, a hot oven, a cake unturned, a silly dove, which remember, it's like a stupid bird, made no sense, treacherous bow, useless vine, empty vessel, stubborn donkey. That's what people in sin are. Talk about a blow to the self-esteem, right? God says that to continue on in our sin, if we continue on like that, is like seeking comfort in the arms of a prostitute. It's spiritual harlotry. God, in his wrath in this book, is described as a jealous husband. We've talked about that. As a frustrated shepherd, a destructive moth, ferocious lion. His judgment is said to be like a whirlwind, said to be washing away of sin. It's like the yoking of a stubborn heifer, the bringing down of a bird in the sky. These are descriptions of God's wrath found in the book of Hosea. So sin abounds. We see the plight of sin. We see what God thinks of it. We see God's wrath in light of it. It's the plight of their sin. Jump to chapter 9, look at verse 15. I swear we're going to get to the message of hope soon. Maybe. Chapter 9, verse 15 says that all their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. Because of the evil of their deeds, I'll drive them from my house. I will love them no more. All their princes are rebellious. Their wickedness is there, and there I hated them. So a common phrase is that God hates sin, but not the sinner. That's not in the Bible. The Bible, over and over, we see where God says he hates the sinner. Here, there I hated them. Not there I hated it, there I hated them. The depiction that we have in Hosea is a God who, yes, hates sin, but also hates the sinner. God hates evil. God hates the sinner. Now, the idea of that, where people say it, is the idea that, well, God always is merciful and that God's still there. Yes, we agree. But here, God hates the sinner. God actually said in chapter 9, verse 1, to not rejoice. Do not rejoice, O Israel, with joy like other peoples. He says, don't be happy. Don't be happy in your sin. Don't act like all is good. Verse 2, the threshing floor and the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fall in her. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt and shall eat unclean things in Assyria. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord, nor shall their sacrifices be pleasing to him. It shall be like bread of mourners to them. All who eat shall be defiled, for their bread shall be for their own life. It shall not come into the house of the Lord. Chapter 9, verse 7. The days of punishment have come. The days of recompense have come. Israel knows the prophet is a fool. The spiritual man is insane because of the greatness of your iniquity and the great enmity. Verse 9. They're deeply corrupted as in the days of Gibeah. He will remember their iniquity. He will punish their sins. Okay? They're going to punish. God will punish their sins. He's not okay with this. Hosea is a story of sin and judgment, but also of hope. But also of hope. We will not understand the message of God. We will not understand the Bible if we can't comprehend that our God can be fiercely angry with his people for their sin. That God can be fiercely angry with his people for their sin, and yet passionately committed to them with a merciful and steadfast love. God's fiercely angry over their sin, and yet committed to them with steadfast love. Dramatic pictures of Israel's sin are all over this book, and of God's judgment, but also we have pictures of God acting in his love. We see that he's a loving husband. Chapter 6, we see that he's a healing physician. Chapter 11, a loving parent. Also in chapter 11, a protecting lion. Chapter 14, a life-giving dew. Let's look at chapter 11. We'll read the whole chapter. Here we see God showing his love. Now remember how sinful they are. Remember how wicked they are. Remember how they had acted towards God. And yet here's what God says. When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called them my son, as they called them. So they went from them. They sacrificed to the Baals and burned incense to carved images. I taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I drew them with gentle cords, with bands of love. And I was to them as those who take the yoke from their neck. I stooped and I fed them. He shall not return to the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king. Because they refuse to repent, and the sword shall slash in his cities, devour his districts, and consume them. Because of their own counsels, my people are bent on backsliding from me. Though they call to the Most High, none at all exalt him. So they call to him, but they don't actually exalt him. But then verse 8, how can I give you up? How can I hand you over? How can I make you like Admah? How can I set you like Zeboim? My heart churns within me. My sympathy is stirred. I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come with terror. They shall walk after the Lord. He will roar like lion. He will roar like a lion when he roars. Then his sons shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling like a bird from Egypt, like a dove from the land of Assyria. And I will let them dwell in their houses, says the Lord. So this is who they were. They were that wicked, that sinful, and God says, but I'm not done with them. but I am not done with them. This is a powerful picture for the wayward wanderer. This is God calling us back to him. But there's only one way back, and it's not how our world would understand it. Our world would understand this idea of kind of cheap grace, an idea, oh yeah, everyone's sinned, everyone's screwed up. Yeah, we're all messed up people. No big deal, just come on back. No, that'd be cheap grace. But finally, we do see a way back through a plea for repentance. So we started by looking at a plight of Israel's sin. Chapter 11, you clearly see a profession yet of God's love, and now we see a plea for repentance. Chapter 14. O Israel, return to the Lord your God, verse 1, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away all iniquity, receive us graciously, for we will offer the sacrifices of our lips. Okay, in your iniquity you've stumbled away, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's a way to return. It says to approach him in his graciously, receive us graciously. Cry out for the grace that's desperately needed. Verse 3, Assyria shall not save us, will not ride on our horses, nor will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are gods. For in you the fatherless finds mercy. So we're not going to look anywhere else for salvation. We called out to Assyria, we called out to Egypt. They're not going to save us. That's not going to work. We're not going to go to the works of our own hands. We can't do it. It says return to God, cry out for the grace, realize we can't do it, that Assyria can't save us, that nothing can. Chapter 4, I will heal their backsliding. Approach God that way. He says, I'll heal their backsliding. I'll love them freely. So it's not like, well, I'll heal them, but I'm still going to be kind of mad for a long time. No, I'll love them freely. For my anger is turned away from him. I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall grow like the lily and lengthen his roots like Lebanon. His branches shall spread. His beauty shall be like an olive tree and his fragrance like Lebanon. Those who dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall be revived like grain and grow like a vine. Their scent shall be like the wine of Lebanon. I don't know what Lebanon smells like, but you read those verses and it's good. God's going to restore. He's going to fix it. I gather that this is good. God can heal backsliding and love us freely if we approach him with the attitude of chapter 14, verses 1 to 3. Verse 8, Ephraim shall say, what have I to do any more with idols? I have heard and observed him. I am like a green cypress tree. Your fruit is found in me. So what do I have to do with idols? He's saying, I don't need them anymore. I will have nothing to do with them. So he doesn't get to keep his idols, right? It wasn't like, I'm going to call out to God. He's going to heal my backsliding. He's going to love me freely. And then I'm going to kind of keep my idols here on the side. No, he says, what do I have to do with these? They have nothing to do with me. They're to be gotten rid of. Verse 9, who is wise, let him understand these things. Who is prudent, let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right. The righteous walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. The righteous walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. Let's turn back quickly to chapter 3. We'd hate to leave Hosea with Gomer and just leave that, unresolved. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, Then the Lord said to me, so this is God speaking to Hosea, Go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery, just like the love of the Lord for the children of Israel, who look to other gods and love the raisin cakes of the pagans. So here, Gomer has run off again. She lives with another lover, and God says to Hosea, Go and love your faithless wife. Go and love her. She's been unfaithful all along, and God commands him to go again and love her. He says, just like how he loves the nation of Israel, even though they continually go from him, despite their complete, utter failure. we see no reason to think that Gomer had ever given Hosea a real reason to love her, right? In fact, he had every reason not to. He had every reason to be done with her. He had legal authority to be done with her, to have nothing else to do with her. Why would he possibly go after her? Chapter 3, verse 2. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and 1½ omers of barley. And I said to her, you shall stay with me many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So too will I be towards you. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. So he goes and he buys her. He redeems her. He says, even though you've done all this, even though you've been you were a prostitute when I met you, you were a prostitute when I got married, you continued on, you were unfaithful, you have given me no reason to love you. Despite all that you've put me through, despite all of that, I'll take you back. Despite all of that, not only will I take you back, but I'm willing to pay the cost to get you back. Sure, you're a terrible sinner, but I'll take you back. What a beautiful picture of what Christ has done for us. We did nothing that would make him love us. The Bible says that while we were still sinners, while we were still enemies, he died for us. God paid the ultimate price for us. Fact is, we've chased other lovers time and time again. We've sought our own ways. We've lived by our own precepts. We've looked for other answers over and over. Time after time, we seek our idols. And God says, all you have to do is turn back to me. I'm here. He says, I paid for you. I already paid the price. I'm here. It's an incredible thing. God, I pray that tonight we would be reminded of your love, really. Be easy to get lost in just the depravity of Israel during the time this was written, but if we're honest, I don't think that we're much different. Our lives can easily be full of sin, and yet you've paid the price. You've bought us, you've redeemed us. All we need to do is turn to you. I pray we'd remember that. Thank you for that. I pray we remember your love. It truly is an incredible thing that you would love us. I know we're not that lovable. Thank you for loving us. Please help us to love you. Thanks for being so good to us. The truth is, we are like a Gomer, and yet you love us anyways. Amen.